Welcome to Stories and Songs by Afterglow Music. My name is Joel McCausland.
And I'm Kevin Peay, and we've been creating music for a long time.
We'd like to tell you the stories behind our songs. Wow, what a great night tonight to be able to reconnect with some old friends and reminisce about some of the great memories we've had.
You know, we just had a nice dinner with this group, and boy, it's been fun to talk about the past and the current and some of the future. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the experience that we had in London.
We should introduce our special guest too.
We should.
Tonight we have Merrill Jensen and his wife Betsy with us, and Merrill has arranged music for us. Gosh, it's really since the beginning almost, huh?
Absolutely. And I remember that when we were with Deseret Book and we had an opportunity to have a discussion about what should we do differently with some of the music, and somebody had suggested, I think it was Lauren, and Lauren is here with us tonight. Of course, he's our wonderful engineer and producing, and his wife Helen, and my wife Cindy with us tonight as well.
Diana's over there preparing her primary lesson.
And when we started talking about this whole thing, it was, what should we do different? And I think it was you, Lauren, that actually said, you know, we ought to talk to Merrill. Merrill's been to London, and he's done a lot of feature films. I remember Harry's War and Windwalker and some of those wonderful ones that took place for a long time. And one thing led to another, and we got approval to go to London. And so Lauren called Merrill, and Merrill got together with us and told us, well, we're going to go to London.
It was a match made in heaven.
It was amazing. So, Merrill, thank you for being with us tonight.
This is fun.
You know, when this idea first came up, I just remember thinking that's not possible. Like, we'd been doing kind of on a shoestring to this point. You know, we'd done maybe an album or two with Deseret Book, and we'd done a couple things on our own, and then suddenly this idea gets floated out there that you could actually go. And then we hear, this was, for me anyway, was kind of this big eye-opener. We're going to record with the London National Philharmonic Orchestra. Yep. I thought, that's amazing. Like, I had this vision of this grand hall, you know, in London, and this orchestra that plays. And I guess we learned that they're an orchestra for hire. If you had the money, you could get the National Philharmonic to play for you.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any of that. So when this first was promoted to us, I thought, what an amazing concept. We could actually go over there and record a couple albums.
And then I thought to myself, who's paying for it? Now who's going to pay
Somebody
for all
has
this?
to pick that. The orchestra actually is made up of retired London Symphony musicians or current London musicians that wanted a side gig, let's say. And so London Symphony performed in the concert hall usually, and this orchestra was formed by a guy named Sid Sachs, who got his fame putting a little orchestra together to accompany the Beatles on their albums.
I remember some of that story. Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
so that was great.
And so, Merrill, isn't this some of the same group that John Williams would use?
Well, when John Williams put his first Star Wars soundtrack together, he had written for 8 trumpets, 8 trombones, 12, I think, French horns, and so on. So the London Symphony didn't have that many musicians, so they combined it with this orchestra, the National Philharmonic, and so that they could fit it in the hall. And they would sit around waiting for the Beatles to come up with a song, and the Beatles would write the song, come downstairs, and play it for the orchestra, and then they would say, we want the violins to do this, or we want the orchestra to do this. And then there was an arranger sitting there that would then arrange it, and then he'd hand it to copyists, and copyists would then print it so that musicians could read it. And that's Sid Sachs. He's the leader of the orchestra that we're using. So very famous orchestra. Just as another aside, one of the recording sessions, the guy that played Penny Lane, the piccolo trumpet solo in Penny Lane, played for me. And they said, why don't you ask him how big of a royalty he got? And I said, so how big a royalty did you get? And he says, nothing. He says,
you just played the session,
they just asked me to play something, and I played it. And they said, do you want royalty for it? And he says, oh, no, that's fine. Not thinking the Beatles are going to go anywhere.
Well, I'm not sure my memory's right, but I probably made this up, but I thought Sid Sachs was the guy that played the solo in Eleanor Rigby. Is that right?
Yeah.
The little violin.
I remember that.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Sid Sachs did actually say that.
Yeah,
because I remember
that's
when
what
he pulled out the violin, and he said, this is a 375-year Stradivarius violin that's been in my family.
Yeah.
And we were looking at a song to put that on, and I think it was Touch of the Master's Hand.
That's right.
That we're going to talk about in another episode. But he picked that violin to play the Touch of the Master's Hand on that session. I remember that as clear as day.
I was totally starstruck when he told that story. It was amazing to see. You know, Sid's I'm sure he's gone now. I don't know if you stayed in touch with him. He was an older gentleman even then, and he was kind of really, really very British and kind of dignified. And he played this beautiful violin. Did he take us out for fish and chips that first night?
He did, sure.
Seems like we went out and did the traditional fish and chips and
with
newspaper and the whole thing, right?
He and his wife.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
The thing about Sid, as glamorous as we want to paint him, he was so down to earth. Just the nicest, caring. I mean, the first time I met him, I had to call him on the phone. The first feature film I did, the director said, "We want you to go to London." And I go, "Oh, okay. And here's the phone number, and I'll leave it up to you for the rest of it." I call him, and he used a phrase that I used to love. He says, "Just leave it to me." I'd leave it to him. And anyway, so he's Jewish by religion, but he has a familiarity with our church, and he found out I had been called as a bishop, and he introduced me as the cardinal of the Mormon church.
He knew a little bit about the church.
Yeah, he did. But as you said, Joel, at the beginning, to walk in and be counted as a group working with this orchestra is honestly mind-boggling.
It was
the first
for me.
time I went over, I was starstruck too. And of course, getting into the studio, you have to roll up your sleeves and go to work. The other thing I was going to say, Sid treated us as equals.
Yeah.
There's no hierarchy. He ran a tight ship. I had to bring the money over in traveler's checks. Because
to pay him right there, right? Finish the day and get him paid, right?
And I cashed the money and gave it to him a day early. And then he sat there with the money and paid everybody cash. Mm-hmm. And that's how we got a deal. He was very helpful.
He was always ready to step in and guide and give us direction on things that we needed to know that we didn't always know. Sometimes the recording industry is a little different than it is back here in Utah.
Yep.
And Lauren, when you're talking about that, some of the video footage that we've seen recently, you're on a phone in the studio, in the control room, and I think you were talking to somebody out in the...
Talking to Merrill.
On the podium.
Right.
And so this was back in a time where cell phones didn't exist. Cindy and I were talking about that tonight. Sometimes, during this era, it was old school.
It was really old school.
Yeah, well, it was old school in a lot of ways. Thinking of an album, even in movies, the way we sync music to picture was old school. And they kind of had a jerry-rig everything. That first studio that John Williams recorded Star Wars in was in a decommissioned studio that they just put electronics together and sort of built with these remote pieces of gear, put the studio back together so they could record. I actually recorded in that place. And when I came in the first day, the engineer was standing on top of the console.
I remember that.
And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm trying to see the modules, the connectors."
Oh, he was actually like pushing them down.
He was trying to push them down, and he used his whole weight to push them down. Now that I'd never seen before, or will ever see again.
That's a first.
and that guy was a famous engineer.
And this was all done on 2-inch tape, right?
It was done on 2-inch tape.
And then,
everything was 24 track.
And I can remember Lauren were trying to figure out how to get all that 2-inch back to the United States.
That was a little bit of a challenge.
They're about 30 pounds a piece, aren't they, those reels?
And we had to be really careful that we had all the documentation so we could get back through customs.
Mm-hmm.
One time through customs, I almost blew it because I said I was coming over for work. Well, that meant a visa, and I was told not to say that. I had to. Everything was legal and correct, but you had to be careful what you say, or you end up
spending time with customs. That's right. That's right.
But it was fun because there are only a few of us that came from America to London to record, and the musicians wanted to work, of course, and so they would tell us what to do and how to package our thing. I mean, it's way different now. I carried the music over in a suitcase.
I remember that, a big old sheaf of scores.
Yeah,
of paper.
big. And the first time I arrived without the music. I sent it because I thought, I'm not going to carry that. That's about 50, 60 pounds.
Yeah.
And when I arrived there, my suitcase didn't come with the music in it. And I didn't know what to do. I wasn't with anyone. No one was helping me. And all of a sudden, I don't have any music.
Now, this was when you went over first.
That's the first time.
This
yeah.
wasn't our session.
I was doing a movie called Great American Indian. And the music didn't come. And so they had to search for it. And it was in Paris. Somehow it'd gone the wrong place.
And back in the day, you couldn't just call up and say, "Hey, send me a digital copy, and I'll get it reprinted." You didn't have any options.
And
Right?
I called my wife and I says, "I don't know what to do," and she calmed me down, and we contacted the copyists, and they had everything on a vellum sheet. They hand copied this with ink.
Wow.
From my pencil score, and so they just started making copies over again, and then they sent it over in some fast way. And that same day, they knocked on my door, and it was the day of this. No, I think it was the day before the session, so it was all okay. But it was
Scary moments.
It was scary, yeah.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
with all our hiring, we paid the orchestra in advance, and if we don't show up, that's too bad. They get paid.
They get paid.
You know what's amazing? A lot of times, the musicians have never seen the music. The first time you hand it to them in the session is the first time they've seen
That's
it.
correct.
And then they have to be able to play well enough. And, there's very, very little time for rehearsal. You basically go through things. If there's some notes that need to be changed, those get identified, and then the recording is taken.
Well, I mean, it's true what Lauren's saying. They literally have not seen the music before. And the amount of music that we wanted to record per session, a session's 3 hours with a 15-minute break in the center.
And then, Joel, you would be back in the back of a booth singing so that the musicians,
So they knew what we wanted to do with it, right?
Yeah.
right, they could hear it on the headset, but it wasn't being recorded.
And actually, you know what? I've thought about that a couple of times. It's so different now because I couldn't really, in the way that we can today, I couldn't really dictate anything. Leading the orchestra was metric, and you could do pauses and hold for a minute on a particular place where you wanted to express something, but I had to adapt a little bit. And I still remember we talked about the touch of the master's hand, a lot of lyrics in a pretty quick time on that song. And I remembered how hard it was to keep up with the orchestra, to try to fit all my lyrics in
slow
there.
down for you.
I know. We could have done that, but it was just such a different experience that way.
Yeah, you'd never experienced that. So I guess I just hadn't prepared you well enough
Oh no,
for that.
It would have been different no matter what we'd done. It was just a unique
and
experience.
there you were. Were we at Abbey Road Studios for that one?
The first one was the one at Wembley, right?
Wembley,
Right.
okay.
And actually, we were lucky that way because we did 2 albums each time we went, didn't we?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm trying to remember what the 4 albums were.
The first time was CTS Lansdowne, I believe, was the Christmas, and I believe it was Hymns, How Great Thou Art, if I remember correctly. The second one with, and I could be wrong.
And
but
did
there
we
was
do More Perfect Light over there too?
We did a More Perfect Light
That was the
because
second trip.
that's where Touch of the Master's Hand came in, and then there was
The Christmas was at Abbey Road.
Christmas was at
Okay.
Abbey Road. So I remember that there were, like you said, there were 2 albums.
Yeah, we had a chance to go twice and do 2 albums each time, which, to your point, Merrill, that's a lot of music to get recorded in.
a lot,
we were
yeah.
there less than a week each time.
Right.
Just a few days.
We went to Abbey Road, and that was a whole nother experience unto itself in regards to being right where the Beatles were.
I still remember, and I can't remember the exact wording. I was probably too shell-shocked, but we walk into Abbey Road, and there's a gold record on the wall, and it said something like,
I remember.
recordings by the Beatles at this location have totaled 4 billion copies worldwide.
Oh,
like,
I didn't remember
Wait a
that.
minute. That's almost as many people as there were in the world at the time, I thought.
But that was 30 some odd years ago.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy. I talking about this and putting all these pieces together in my mind, when we first heard about Merrill, and of course we had been working with Lauren since 1983. Lauren Ashcraft is just amazing at what he does. both mechanically, technically, and with ears as an engineer. Just a beautiful.
We don't mean that they're big. We mean that they're really good. He has ears for days.
Oh,
this guy.
just unreal. And when we heard that we had the opportunity to go with Merrill, I was like, well, wait a sec. That's pretty big stuff, because his movies had been out there for a while. And Merrill, I don't remember all the movies, but what I do remember is,
Well, there's Great American Indian.
Great American
that
Cowboy?
was my first one. I didn't do Great American Cowboy.
I'm sorry, strike that from the record.
But that's okay. Nice compliment.
No, Harry's War,
Harry's War and
Windwalker,
yeah.
and what are some of the other?
Well, let's
Solo.
see. Well, in order,
Really, Solo? I
in
didn't
order.
know
Let's
that.
see. The Londons were the first film I remember well is Great American Indian, and then I came back for a film called Three Warriors, that was produced by Saul Zaentz, who had won Academy Award for Amadeus, the film on Mozart, and One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I was in royalty, film-wise.
Pretty
And-
rare air
And
there.
then when did Windwalker and Harry's War?
Windwalker came a couple of years later. Harry's War was before, and then Takedown was a wrestling movie I did.
I remember that.
Lorenzo Lamas.
Lorenzo Lamas,
Yeah,
right,
remember
and Ed Herman. Ed Herman was a famous star as well.
Oh, yeah.
And he starred in both Harry's War and Takedown.
Well, as you made reference to being starstruck about the London experience, I was pretty starstruck about the Merrill Jensen experience.
Really?
And so we
You're
were
not that way now, but with me.
Well, we know you now.
no, we pretty much are. We're pretty starstruck with Betsy, your wife. So
Yeah.
So
I am too. I'm
you're,
still starstruck with her.
and you're the package. So
But but with that, Sid Sachs started it all. He was kind and personable and treated me like I was his son. I mean, he told me all the ways to save money. We recorded actually more music in the same allotted time than, I don't know if that was a union thing or whatever. Anyway, he allowed us to record more music.
I remember a couple of times when, the orchestra's got to take a break, and all the guys would head outside for a smoke break. A lot of the guys who were playing, and I always felt like Sid was kind of on our side, like he's trying to make sure that we kept time and got back on the job, and he was great. That way.
He was such a mentor. I mean, he'd help me, tell me where I could improve on my composition and so on, and he'd tell me stories about Henry Mancini and others that he'd recorded with, but he was concerned for you guys.
Yeah.
And he wanted us to be successful. He treated you guys just as equals too. And so that's how I feel with you. I feel like you're my brothers. Heavens, I mean, there's nothing there that makes me feel like I can't sing a note. That's one thing. You guys can sing better than I can.
Yeah,
we
but
all have our little
we don't know
talents.
anything about music. We just,
Yeah,
that's all we do is sing.
we all have our talents and we contribute.
It was kind of magical, though, really. I mean, the chance to go there and to have all of us doing what we did, including Sid and the orchestra, and even today, the sound that we got out of those sessions, is unique in our catalog. It's unique for everything else we did.
That sound is unique. I have to tell you a funny story with being equal then. So when I showed up the first time, they said, "Oh, Merrill, would you like a cup of tea?" And I'd say, "No, thank you." "Well, how about coffee then?" "No." And then Sid said, he's a Mormon. "Oh, okay, you want a Diet Coke?" Or Coke, I think he just said
They
Coke.
knew a little bit about us.
Yeah,
didn't they?
and I've recorded probably half a dozen studios over there at least with all the productions I've done. So this is an example of staying true to your convictions. There was a big concert happening at Royal Albert Hall. Now that's the big classic hall of all halls in the world. And John Williams was there and some other film composers, and I was there. And I got to go up into the artist booth, and there was John Williams. And so we just visited. And if I had water, I'd have washed his feet. I mean, this guy was, whoa.
He did everything,
He's sick.
right? For a while, he was the guy
He
who
was
did everything.
everything. Star Wars, Harry Potter, and da-da-da-da-da. And there was another gentleman conducting and rehearsing the orchestra. And so after that break, we came down through the elevator and down to the floor underneath the stage floor. There's a cafeteria there. And the whole orchestra was there. And we walk in, and oh my goodness, these musicians rush up to John and, oh, we're working with you. Good to see you. Merrill, how are you doing? I understand we're recording with you tomorrow. I mean, out of, the breath was equal to me as it was to John Williams. And then we were standing there, and a waiter came up, handed him a cocktail, and handed me a ginger ale. Nobody asked me what I wanted. Somebody told them.
Yeah, they just knew.
They just knew it.
That's great.
And I didn't have to be embarrassed by saying no, and being uncomfortable because I'm not fitting in. I was with John Williams, and they loved us both, and we were drinking what was appropriate. It was amazing.
That first trip that we took over to London, it's a long trip overnight.
Oh, yeah.
And so Helen and I had gone in advance. We'd gone to make sure we could check out some hotels and do some other things. We were there a couple days in advance waiting for you to all arrive. And I think all of you came on the same plane, but we had to wait to check into the hotel. And while we were waiting to check into the hotel, all of you fell asleep in the lobby. Merrill and I had been to London before, and so we knew we had to kind of get some type of rest. But I think Kevin and Joel, you took off and did some things.
We went for a run in Hyde Park.
Yeah, you went
We
running.
did go for, but that was like in the middle of the night, wasn't it?
It was
early
in the middle of the
morning?
night in London, but it was in the day in Utah.
Yeah, we did. We went running in Hyde Park. I
We
remember that.
warned you. We said, when you get there, take 2 hours just to relax, sleep if you can, and then we'll meet you down in the lobby.
We couldn't do it. We were too excited to be there.
So then I remember after you got some sleep, it was the next day, and the window was open, and Kevin goes out to the window and starts singing, what was it?
Was it Who Will Buy from
Who
Oliver?
will buy this from Oliver?
Right.
And
When in Rome, be in Rome.
people were down on the street looking up at him like, who is this guy? Going to London, we have to worry about transportation. And so we got a car, and it wouldn't start sometimes. And boy, while you're trying to concentrate on which side of the road you're supposed to be driving on and which way you turn when you get to a corner and all that, and then to have this car not start when you needed it to. And I discovered that it was a solenoid problem in the car. So I took it was an audio jumper cord of some type, and I was able to short across the solenoid of the car. It was a Ford.
Yeah.
And it would start. So it got to the point where every time we stopped and needed to go somewhere else, I had to get out, raise the hood, and short that solenoid so that the car would start.
Just proves that a good studio engineer can fix anything.
That's right.
Well, there were some funny experiences. The other thing that kind of blew me away at Abbey Road, and I don't know if they still do this, but the masonry wall in front of the studio, people would come from all over the world and write Beatles lyrics on that wall. And then every few weeks they'd go out there and whitewash it again so they'd have a clean slate and more people could come and write lyrics. But it was almost a block there, and all the way up and down that wall there were snippets of Beatles songs written down on that wall. It was amazing.
And somewhere we've got a picture of the crosswalk where
we
four
recreated.
Beatles.
Yes.
We recreated
Where
that.
is that?
It's somewhere in the pile of
It
stuff.
was amazing how busy the road was. You
I
couldn't
know.
just walk out there
Yeah.
and take a picture. You had to dodge traffic.
Sure.
I remember my sister had that. I think it was Abbey Road, and
Oh, yeah.
Was that the name of the
yeah,
album?
Yeah.
and of course John Paul and Ringo and George. They're walking across that crosswalk, and when I saw the crosswalk, it was like, oh, this is the same crosswalk that's on that album. And I asked her about that one day, my sister Sherry. I says, where is that? And she says, oh, we just threw all that stuff away. And I'm like, oh, those vinyls now are worth so much. But, this whole discussion has brought, Merrill, you just said you don't sing very well. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure you sing just fine. But this whole discussion about orchestra and sections, and I think this is where somebody once said that we're all part of this great symphony.
Yeah.
And each of us have our sections. And we all play for the master conductor. And as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe in Jesus Christ, and he is our Savior. and he is the master conductor. And so a lot of the things that we've been talking about in the sections in the symphony and the leaders of the symphony, and each of us taking part and being the best we can in that section that we're called to, builds the wonderful orchestra of unity under the master conductor. And so it's just, I thank you for that analogy that brought that image to me so early on in our opportunity to go to London. It's been very special to reflect back on that.
Well, there were no egos with us, either separately or collectively. You guys set that when I think you said, we don't want to make any money off this thing. We'll just donate it all to the missionary fund. And I'm on the other side thinking, yeah, you got to make money or you're not going to be in business. And so that taught me that you two are dedicating your lives and your talents for the building of the kingdom. And I felt connected to you. I loved you. I just thought you were wonderful. And not all my clients were like that.
Well, we were fortunate to be able to have Deseret Book kind of take all this over, and Joel and I went on our business ways and continued on and still do today.
We could still do the music without having that pressure too much of having to make a living at it. But, there's, Kevin, the thing you said a minute ago kind of struck me too. And this is true whether we were in London or Nashville or Los Angeles. I've always been impressed by the graciousness of these artists we've worked with. And I'm talking about studio artists,
Yeah.
They don't know us from Adam. Most of them in those places they weren't members of our church. They might have only known a little bit about us, but it seems to me that almost everywhere we went out of the state, the musicians were always all about trying to make our little contributions way better than they ever would have been. And, they, like you said, Lauren, they don't really have a chance. You mentioned it too, Merrill. They don't have a chance to really learn the music. I remember throwing songs at the guys in Nashville that they'd never heard before. We played it once on a cassette tape, and they just jumped in. And then they're like, oh, you know what? This would make this song this much better. And that kind of graciousness of spirit, even though we're just a couple of guys from Utah, to be able to watch them in that process and say, we've got something to contribute here, and this is going to make that song better than it ever could have been on its own. That's been a blessing,
and
too.
I think you have to appreciate that. And with all the clients I've worked for in the 45 years now that I've been doing this, the ones who haven't made it are the ones that are hard to work with. The ones who are still climbing, at least in my sense, kind of want to climb over your back and get to the higher rung. But when they've made it, they extend the arm and want to pull you up the ladder, and they will make you equals. I referred to visiting with John Williams. He would not talk about his career. He wanted to find out about me. What was I doing? We had a mutual friend. We had an engineer who's LDS who was also John Williams' engineer, and so he had heard of me before I met him, and he was all about me. That's a great example.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I mean, how can you make that better than that? And so I wanted to be that kind of guy. So when people call me and ask me questions, I'm on the phone till they're probably sick of me, because I want to give them all I can give them, because it's talent. It's the Lord's blessing that he gave me that I can now share and help build someone else up. I just feel like I have to do that. And so we stepped into Royal Company when we went to London with those musicians. Now, you mentioned something about the sound. Those studios had been there forever, and they figured out how to move the mics to the right position to get the best sound. And those musicians, my word.
Amazing.
Joel, you said, they came in, they've never seen the music before. There were times when we would keep our schedule going. We'd rehearse the song once and then take
it. Sounds pretty good for that, right?
My goodness. I mean,
I was thinking we probably got 90, maybe 100 minutes of recorded music each time we went, right?
Oh, really? Well,
that's amazing to get that much done. And we were in the studio maybe 2 or 3 days, right?
Right.
That's it. Maybe
I don't know, Lauren
parts of
would
2 days.
remember.
Yeah, that's crazy to think we could get that done that fast.
The other thing, you say they'd give suggestions. As a conductor, I would sit there and watch them. As we would stop and break, they would all talk to each other. Sid, sax, would give the violins the bowings and then send them off to the other sections of the orchestra. They just were so cooperative to make it work. As an example, one of the movies I wrote had a chase scene where an airplane pilot was in distress and she was about to wreck her plane. And I wrote this really ambitious musical scene that had a lot of notes in it and had a lot of different rhythms and different measures. And time is money. And as we were rehearsing it, took a little extra time. And we were recording. Well, I got lost. I'm conducting, and I had to be there because it was like a 5/4 measure, 3/4, 2/4, 5/4. You know, I mean, it just moved back and forth, and I had to cue him. And there, sitting in front of me, was a second violinist. He laid his fiddle down on his lap and started conducting for me. And he conducted it until I could see the pattern. And when I finally got it, he picked up his violin and started playing.
Wow.
Now, that's how friendly that orchestra was.
Well, it's a very professional approach.
Yeah, the whole goal was just how good can we make this music?
Yep.
Exactly.
And how can I help get that done?
I had a
That's
French horn
amazing.
player once. Was it that on our album? He blew a note, and he said, "We'll fix that." And so after all the musicians left at the end, he came in the studio and re-recorded that horn note. And I says to Sid, "So how much do we pay him for that?" Because overtime was like...
It was expensive, wasn't it?
For the first 15 minutes, you paid the full 3 hours every 15 minutes. He says, "No, he just did it because he wanted to help you."
We were talking about Sid and that famous violin, that Stradivarius violin that he said was 375 years old, and finding the songs that would really fit that. And one of those we'd like to play for you now, which is How Great Thou Art.
Consider all the worlds thy hands have made. I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display.
You know, listening to that song, from a musical perspective, one of the things that was so cool for me, because we did, at least a couple of the things we did there were album projects for hymns. You know, we took hymns that we knew, maybe hymns that weren't as familiar to us. We had this chance to kind of go over there. And from a musical perspective, one of the coolest things was we get a song that we've heard our whole lives, and you get an arranger like Merrill doing what he does to create kind of a whole new sound about that particular hymn. And then you put it in that studio with that orchestra. And for me, it was almost like those songs were kind of reborn, you know, like the first time I'd ever heard them. And some of the treatments for those hymns were just so phenomenal. It really did make it feel like it was a whole new piece that we never really experienced.
That compliment you own, and I'll tell you why. I'm used to having a client be fairly specific as to what I need to do. But I remember sitting around in my office with the hymn books out, and we chose the hymns right there. Mm-hmm. And then you said, go arrange them. And I said, what kind of style do you want? No, you just go ahead. Whatever you do will be right. Now, that was unheard of, to have a client say that. Well, what does that make me do? Does that make me freeze up and not able to write? No. It opened up all of this creative idea. And so I wrote beyond my, I was going to say beyond my own ability, because I had the blessings of the Savior helping me through that. That sounds like too presumptuous. But literally, I had an opportunity to write what the text was saying, and try to create that imagination of what those words mean. Well, for example, I don't know how to say it, but each verse is talking about something slightly different, and I was able to write each verse slightly different. It wasn't a repeat. We just went on and added little things, and sometimes I even tested the harmonies. But I was so involved in trying to say what that text said that you gave me that freedom.
I really liked what you did with all the Christmas songs that we recorded. We recorded several at Abbey Road. I remember specifically "Still, Still, Still."
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was so well done with the orchestra and with your arrangement.
This principle that you're talking about is really fascinating to me, because when you get the liberty to do it, it's interesting because Joel is usually predominantly the lead. I get to do the harmony. And I don't remember very many times where I had to redo a harmony to go around the orchestra. You had already written the parts and the harmony lines were still open for me to insert. So
Yeah.
Wow.
that was fascinating to me, that my harmony to Joel's blend was always still available to me, no matter what.
Merrill always had that ability to create space within the arrangement so that it wasn't competing with your vocal.
You know, Merrill, I liked your explanation that, you know, it was us helping you do that.
Yeah.
The truth is we didn't know what we were doing, and we knew you did, so we
Yeah.
just
Well, I
turned
felt-
you loose to do
Right.
these arrangements.
But you know, on the other hand, I didn't. You're the stars. You're the ones that are singing. I didn't want to get in the way of that.
You
So I
didn't.
tried to create a bed or an environment where you could sing. Well, because I know what you do. It's so much expression, and Kevin, you know, creating those backgrounds, and Joel, the way you assembled things and the way you sang. And all I was trying to do is just give it a nice little.
But remember, you were always first.
Yeah,
We were always second.
I know.
That's my point, is
Yeah.
is that we sang after the orchestra.
That's all. I hadn't thought of it that way, Kevin. The other way is the artist sings the song, and I'm stuck with whatever that
You
style
have to
is.
rearrange around the artist.
Yeah,
We rearranged around you, but we didn't have to rearrange because you left it open.
yeah. Well, I think you said that once too, and it made me feel really good. It was nice to hear that it worked. You know that
It did.
So I obviously feel really a part of the album.
Well, you know, in retrospect, thinking about this time, we were all pretty lucky. Like, you think about the opportunities we were given at that time, and, you know, LDS music was kind of in its infancy in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. There weren't a lot of people out there doing that. And to be able to do what we did with guys like you and with musicians like that and in places like that, I don't know, Kev, I didn't anticipate that when you and I were growing up in Pleasant Grove.
No, not at
Well,
all.
and the other thing is, with this orchestra, anything is possible. They could play anything I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And if the harmonies moved into an area, they would play it flawlessly. I've had other sessions where I have to consider the musicians and write accordingly. I had all the freedom in the world because this orchestra is one of the best in the world.
Thank you, Merrill. Joel, what was one of your other favorite songs that you...
You know, we talked about this when we did it, when we selected, and Merrill was talking about looking at the hymn book and trying to decide which songs should make the cut. I don't know if you guys remember, but about this time, I don't know if it was exactly the same time, but the church, our Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was actually releasing a new hymn book. Mm-hmm. There was a project going on. We worked with Michael Moody, who was working for the church at the time in the music department, and we had an opportunity to sort of look at songs that we weren't that familiar with. And some of them we recorded in London, some of them we recorded here. But I do remember a conversation about Amazing Grace. And Amazing Grace has generally not been considered an LDS hymn, a Mormon hymn, if you will. And yet it's a beautiful song with a beautiful message. And we had the opportunity to record that. And man, the arrangement that Merrill did, we actually thought about kind of from a doctrinal perspective. maybe we should have another verse that kind of rounded out the doctrine a little bit. And so we wrote another verse for this. And just the overall feel I get when I hear that song even today, it's mostly that kind of soaring orchestra and the harmonies we were able to put to it. But the treatment of that one was just powerful.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. His love hath brought me safe thus far. His light will lead me home. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as I endure.
Lauren, Merrill, we want to thank you for this wonderful time to reflect the things that we've felt, heard. We just can't thank you enough for this experience. It has been life-changing for me, my family, Joel,
all of us,
for all
sure.
of us.
Yeah.
But
all of us.
So thank you for being on this episode, and we look forward to other episodes of songs that we've done in the past as well.
Yep.
The Spirit of God like a fire is burning. The latter-day glory begins to come forth. The visions and blessings of old are returning, and angels are coming to visit the earth. We'll sing and we'll shout with the armies of heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb. Let glory to them in the highest be given, henceforth and forever. Amen and amen. We'll call in our solemn assemblies in spirit to spread forth the kingdom of heaven abroad, that we through our faith visions and blessings and glories of God. We'll sing and we'll shout with the armies of heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb. Let glory to them in the highest be given henceforth and forever. Amen and amen. How blessed the day when the Lamb and the Lion shall lie down together without any ire, and Ephraim be crowned with his blessing in Zion, as Jesus descends with his chariot